All right. Let's see. Looks like we're live now. All right.
Are we
Minute.
recording?
Yeah.
Or is YouTube? Okay.
We're on YouTube Live, and it'll record it for later. Okay. So, many of you know I'm Dave, and we're here today. Yesterday, Steamforge Games made an announcement about the end of Guildball. Now, I have a couple people with me here. I have Nick at the bottom, the voice that's heard more than the face that's seen.
You're welcome.
And Ethan, also a voice that's heard. I don't know if you've been on the video on the channel before, um,
Uh,
but
no, I've just done TT
yeah.
Tabletop Sports
So
Network.
it's our Tabletop Sports Network announcer, along with me, and we're here to talk about this announcement and the future, and just in general, Guild Ball. So we do have Guildball on the Tabletop Sports Network, so it is important to us. Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with Guildball?
So I actually started back in season one, fairly shortly after it hit retail release. I got a demo for it at a larger War Machine convention. A lot of the guys who were involved in the creation of Guildball played War Machine originally, and that's why it was a natural extension. I got on it, got to be a U.S. pundit, and eventually dropped out around late season 3.
Okay.
I ran tournaments. I played in tournaments. I know people who go to major national tournaments.
I think I got a majority of the Guildball stuff that I have from you.
Yeah, and that was my clearing out because at the time when I stopped, there wasn't a community around here, and starting up brand new games in our area can be a little rough at times. Because it's getting people into new games in our area is very hard. So
you can always count on an AOS or a 40K game, but
anything else is a hard sell. Yeah. And then on top of that, there was a group in Northwest Arkansas and a group in Springfield, Missouri that played, but both of those largely dried up as well at about that time. So I just took my leave at that point and decided I was through with it.
Right. And you'll see me looking around because I'm running the board, so to speak, today.
I had some concerns with the game when I quit, and it was just it was time to stop.
Right, I hear that. Ethan, why don't you tell us a little about your history with Guildball?
My history with Guildball, I started late season 2. I figured out that the core mechanics of the game actually led to a greater understanding of how the game works, which in this day and age is a really hard sell. So I went from there, started picking up and learning games from David, actually. My wife doesn't like you for the fact that I spent money on it.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. But that's okay. Go ahead.
So going from there, fell in love with the online community. Fell in love with the fact that there was a pundit program, and we've been working to create a local group, and thus far have been marginally successful. I think we've picked up a lot in the past 2 years. We're up to 10 to 12 total members, and then roughly 7 of those are consistently showing up when we do game days. And then COVID happened.
Yeah.
Which I think at this point that goes without saying.
Yeah.
There's no point in diving into what the realm of COVID did. We do have a couple players that liked the Vassal system, and we're playing on that a little bit. And in fact, I think I have like a couple games set up on Friday.
There's a discussion to port it over to Wartable, which is a more purpose-built system for games like that.
Yeah. Well, and
I will say, like,
go ahead.
I will say, like, their move to Tabletop Simulator seemed like a decent system. Because Tabletop Simulator, one of the games they do have, are very intuitive. Vassal is mainly hotkey driven, which if you run IS systems, you're pretty familiar with this makes sense for this. Like Control L for lacerate is the bleed condition, and going on that type of route.
it's literally a it's I mean there are some things that make it a little easier to play, like with the controls and stuff that were set up specifically for Guildball, but it's a pretty rudimentary system. I mean, it'd be like something similar to cutting out the paper dolls and stuff that they provide for you and stuff like that, and just moving them around. I do like the ability to check ranges fairly easily. But before we get too off topic on that, so um, you've been playing Guild Ball for a little while now. It is your favorite game. Actually, it's the only miniatures game that you really play, isn't it?
Um, Pretty much outside of D&D, that
Yeah,
was the only miniature game that ever caught my interest.
yeah. So I've shown him a bunch of different things over the time, and he just kind of took to that. So I'll take just a moment. Uh, as far as playing Guild Ball, I mean, I've been interested in and messing around with it for a couple of years or so. I wasn't very into it until we started getting Ethan into it, and his wife was in, Mariah also, and a few other, just people around getting into it. And then I started playing a little bit more, and actually, I don't want to say caring, but you know what I mean. It was kind of like it was a fun game to play, but it was hard to find someone to play with. And then once we started getting more people interested, just like most games, I played it. So I've been messing around with it, and for a couple of years. So season 3 and now 4. Um, so I'm not by any means an expert. I like making the Tabletop Sports Network videos. I think it's fun, kind of commentating on games as they happen. But um, it's one of my favorite. It has been one of my favorite games out of the many that I have models for. So, but I'm a small model count game type of person if I have to choose, right? So, um, but that being said, so um, we'll get into the discussion about what's happened since yesterday. Well, kind of what's happened since yesterday. So yesterday, like I said, SFG made a huge. It's really a big blog post about this with creators and everybody having their say about what Guild Ball meant to them, and their what they see as the reasoning behind it, and what instead of just making a public statement from the company, they made a let everybody have their say as to what they saw. What I wanted to get into kind of first, and if y'all disagree, we can move into something else, uh, is that there seemed to be a consensus that it seemed like no matter who was talking in that article, that there was some fingers being pointed at the community itself as to COVID. Obviously, I think that it's a given right now. It hurt a lot of people, and it hurts competitive games in a way, in a lot of ways too, because you have to be in the same room. Um, but there was a lot of some finger pointing at the community as to the competitive community and what it did when they couldn't be as casual anymore, and so on and so forth. Um, is that something that y'all saw on that as well?
Well, I can tack on that a little bit because I was there closer to the beginning. Like I said, I remember season 1 Guildball. I remember getting a demo when all the teams weren't even out yet.
Right.
Okay, we didn't have metal models for the entire teams. You had your base 6 for a few of them, and then like the big news months and months after I started was Hunters, the first brand new guild, and they were all metal. So, to just kind of summarize a few points in their blog post that they said, basically they said they designed the game to be very competitive, or very competitively minded, and they feel like that hurt, or at least this is what I read into it. They felt like that hurt the lifespan of the game. And I don't disagree with that sentiment. If you design a game only for top level competitive players, you risk alienating the lower level players, the new people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what happened. And instead of ever fixing it, they just abandoned it. Because if you look at Guild Ball, I play a lot of miniature games. A lot, Dave will tell you.
Yeah.
I play, it's ridiculous. Just within view, there's like a half a dozen miniature games in my room here. And Guild Ball stands out as one of the more complex sets of interactions. Not necessarily that the rules are hard, but how they all piece together with the order of activations and the influence mechanic and the playbook system. When you quote unquote see the matrix on how Guild Ball works, it's a really detailed process to get from point A to point B. And when you're a new player, that almost feels insurmountable. And I think the issue that Guildball had was that right there. The new players didn't see an end. Every time they figured something out, they found something new that they didn't know. And at some point, it doesn't feel like you're making progress.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm digressing a little bit off of what they said.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, as we go along, we just kind of got this together because the announcement was just yesterday. So basically, as you talk, as you finish a point or what you're trying to say, just open it up for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Ethan, what is your take on that particular subject?
On that particular subject, they it in the article they did actually direct it toward that it was a competitive play issue. And they directed it toward the players being a tad bit too competitive. Like if you tore it down to its basic element, that's what you were blaming.
Which,
Now
if I can,
all of go
if
ahead.
I can tack on there for a second, which is very interesting, I have it up here right now, and they said in their article that they designed it to be that way.
Exactly.
Which I find to be a very interesting dynamic, is that they designed it to be that way, and it almost worked too well, is kind of what it feels like.
Well, I mean, with every game community, like from Magic to Pokemon to rock, paper, scissors to any game format, there's going to be someone that's going to be hyper competitive. There's going to be these little tiny pockets of competitive people. And then you start spreading out in polar variants from that point, and you're going to get the less competitive and the less competitive. I think they focused way too much on this tiny little pocket of people rather than the grand community of things. And I believe they also brushed off that, COVID and the competitive people. To me, that is kind of a low blow, especially when from starting a Pokemon League to starting Guildball, I'm trying to treat it the same way. You start off with the people that are new to the game, you show them what's fun about it, and you build on those tactics from there once they start seeing that this is how the game works, this is how the intuitive things they should be seeing come up.
Right.
And it feels like Steamforge ignored that completely.
Yeah, it's new players are the lifeblood of any game system. That's the beginning and the end of it. And I think Steamforged they designed too much for that top level. And while the game worked phenomenally well, I feel like talking to a lot of new players, I talked to a lot of people who tried Guildball and then didn't continue playing it because when they looked at the mechanics and they looked at everything working and firing on all cylinders, there was so much to it that they felt like it wasn't worth mastering because it would take so long.
Well, and I think that there's kind of devil's advocate in a way. I think individual communities do have a part in that as well. And I don't mean every community. I don't mean the community at large, right? I mean individual communities, because with the community that we have around here, we spend a lot of time playing with people who are new and taking the time to explain, what we're doing when we do it, and so on and so forth. It's not just I'm going to beat them up and have a good time, and you know what I mean, and then just leave you to figure it out for yourself. We spend a lot of time trying to show new players, not somewhat of the 30,000 foot view, but also taking it down a little bit and not just saying this is how this works, figure out why. We take a little time. So I think each individual community around the country, the world, whatever you want to say, because it is a worldwide game, is responsible for how new players are introduced to the game, how they're treated during that, that initiation, orientation, whatever you want to call it, bringing them into the game. So I do think that individual communities have some responsibility for the end of the game. I don't believe the community as a whole, especially the online community, really has too much to do with that. Because everything, even with we had a number of things happen recently, but it seemed to me that the community as a whole has tried to help them to help Steam Force with the bringing in new players. How can we change things? You know, but I think in this instance, it was just one way or the other. It was two extremes. Either we cater heavy to new players and get new players, or we cater heavy to the competitive side. And they weren't willing to go in the middle, you know, and say, maybe we can make a separate game mode or something for beginners, kind of like Infinity's doing with their
Code
Code 1.
one.
Yeah. So you can use the same models, but maybe you play 3v3 like the demo version or whatever, and you take some time to simplify the rules a little bit. But when you play the actual game, you step up to that level.
Yeah, we the community already had that, and it was called like Puppy Bowl. And it was just a 3v3. There was no abilities. It was basically run down, attack, or get the ball.
Okay, right there, if you don't mind me interrupting, I think that's the best part of that. So if you look at a Guildball card and you look at all the interactions that can happen with the way that the influence structure works in the all-chaining activations, David, I completely agree with you, and I don't think you're playing the devil's advocate. I think we're saying the same thing. Guildball had, in my opinion, too many interactions locked behind what was a very complex series of events. Essentially, you were looking at a Rube Goldberg machine. And until you saw it, you didn't appreciate every single step. And I can sit there with a new player and walk them through every single step. But if it's a 30-step process with a decision tree at every point,
yeah,
at some point that's not teachable. I mean, you'd have to spend hours upon hours with one player in just a basic game to walk them through all of that. And I think that's where Guildball's biggest sin was, is there's too much of its balance, too much of its ability was behind these very complex interactions. There was stuff that people were proclaiming was overpowered, but really wasn't. The problem was the counterplay was so subtle and so well hidden that your average player, even after 100 games, couldn't see it.
Yeah.
And that's that design for the top level. The top level players will see it just fine. The top level players will see the broken stuff right off the bat. But your middle and your lower level, I keep using those, I'm talking in terms of skill level and experience, not these people are inferior. But those lower skill players, they barely remember how to play the game. They don't have the tools to appreciate all of this. And when you dunk them in the deep end, what do you have? They sink. They don't care. And I think that's where the Puppy Bowl did really well, is they stripped all the abilities off.
Yep.
That was the best thing they could have done.
And two of our players individually, I kind of tested one with Puppy Bowl, and then I tested one just because he wanted to dive into the deep end.
Yeah.
And so I let him dive into the deep end playing Corsair, and he said, he wanted me to play Rats. And you could tell in that game that everything was over his head. And you could tell that it was frustrating for him. Mm-hmm. And so after that, he kind of saw that this game isn't as simple as it looks. And then he was able to accept the fact that, we're going to have to slow down. We're going to have to strip these back.
Well, many people see a low model count, right? And they think, oh, there's only 6 guys on each side of the field. This must be,
really
a cakewalk. Yeah. But because you don't have, you're not playing 40K where you have, 100 models aside or something, So and then they just want to hop in there. But it's just like the Puppy Bowl is a great deal. Stripping the abilities is a great deal, getting them used to the movement mechanics, getting used to the attack mechanics, getting them used to those things. But you also have to look at there's a point in any game where someone has to make a decision, right? Is this going to be for me, right? And you can try as much as you want to make it palatable, but at some point, you have to decide.
They're going to look at the whole product eventually.
Yeah.
They're going to see all of it, and then the question is that a game they want to get into? And like I said, I think that's where Guildball stumbled the most. Is this whole complex thing at the end is a fantastic thing when it works, but there's so much to it that I think a lot of people got a little bit in. And because Guild Ball was so cheap to play,
Yeah.
6 models and you're done, they didn't feel bad about saying, maybe not.
I mean, you could literally go and buy what, 40, $50 and have a team,
Yeah.
and if you played it correctly, yeah, there are some captains that are better than others and some things, but on that higher level. But if you took the time to learn what each character did, you could really, I mean, the farmers are a great example of that. The one of I know at least one of the teams that you could get in one piece plastic, for what, 40, $50, $60 max, I think it was, or whatever it was. But
Yeah.
it
Uh,
was outstanding, as far as a starter box goes.
And it doesn't even look that outstanding on paper sometimes.
No,
You can look at something and say, oh, well, this looks okay. And then once you really start diving into it, you find all the synergies.
but
And
once Wendell's in your face, it's just like,
yeah, then
whoa, what
Wendell gets
happened?
there. And
Yeah, so, but um, yeah, and that's part of it. Now,
well, didn't
uh,
they like, not to break off from that, but
no, go
like
ahead.
the blacksmiths you can buy, they're still like one of the cheaper guilds to buy. Like farmers and them are like the lowest tier, and blacksmiths at this level to where you can have any assortment of captain with the master and apprentice stuff, which added a whole new level that
Yeah.
if you started around that time and you happen to be taught by a blacksmith player, I feel that that would have probably like been really frustrating to learn at the time.
Or, but what about
Uh,
the guy that goes in and he's like, I really like these models, right? Because the rule of cool, right? We all have played a game based on the rule of cool at some point or another, right? Picked a team, I mean. Um, and you pick these cool blacksmith, these blacksmith dudes, they got these cool armor and everything, and you get a hold of them, and you're like, they don't play like anything else, anything
so
else on the board.
interesting parallel to that. And I play a lot of War Machine. And there's a couple War Machine factions that have mechanics that are somewhat unique to them, kind of in the same vein as
Yeah.
blacksmiths. And there's always been a concern that people starting with those will have trouble because of the unique mechanics. And universally, the answer has actually been no. They don't have any
Convergence.
issues with it. Convergence,
Yeah.
Grimkin, and Infernals.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, like I've known people who started those factions, and they actually don't have any trouble with them because it's kind of that in for a penny, in for a pound.
Well, when you start
At,
with them, it's a different
at,
story. Like
yeah,
if you
and
switch from one to the other or go the other direction,
oh yeah, it's
yeah,
really jarring. It's a
yeah,
really jarring transition. And I think that hurts Guild Ball more because of the smaller model count. People we're expected to maintain multiple teams, whereas in War Machine you could have one faction and you're fine.
yeah, yeah. I definitely think, like I said, uh, just to kind of get to, unless anybody has anything to add about the community thing. So I think we kind of all agree that there was some finger pointing, but in the same, well, because here's the deal: when it comes to what they said about ending the game there and the community part, and okay, actually, before we get to, I don't want to conclude that field tests. Nick, you didn't participate in that, but did you read about any of that stuff?
I followed it.
Okay.
I make a point that even if I don't play a game to follow it,
Yeah.
because I found that people tend to maintain outdated opinions
Yeah.
and outdated facts, and I don't like that.
Yeah. Well, we went through. I know I went through a couple of games. Ethan, I think you went through a few more.
I
This
went
was
through a bunch.
because this was. I mean, they just started the field tests like right at the beginning of the COVID thing,
Yeah,
and
thereabouts.
yeah, and some of the options they were putting out there were pretty good, and we can talk more in depth about those. But so the first topic, that was one of the things that was said in that article, was that to the field test basically proved that to change things to bring in new players, they couldn't change things enough to bring in new players. I'm paraphrasing. Um,
Without alienating the
without
old ones.
alienating the old players, and once again, that's that not willing to get into the gray area thing. Everything has to be a definite, this or that.
I think part of that was they made their bed and had to lie in it.
I mean, this
They right off the bat, they did not make Guild Ball new player friendly.
no,
Once they started adding in guilds and they started adding in complexity, the second round of captains, I think, where Guild Ball really started to deviate away from new players. Back when it was one captain per team, I think it was a lot more manageable. But
yeah.
once that second captain hit, that opened up a lot of new options. But they just, I truly lost that train of thought.
My train of thought derailed, and there were no survivors.
I guess, but I mean, my commentary with the field test is last stuff I was reading was okay. I got it back. We were that not in the divide from day one. Go back and listen to 2016 podcasts about Guild Ball. Go do it. It's a really enlightening experience. They plan to stop teams at 10 players each.
Yeah.
Their goal was that they stop at 10 players to avoid the power creep and the mechanics creep, because I think they saw this coming, at least to an extent.
Right.
But they realized that people get attached to a team.
Yeah.
And they don't want to give it up.
Right.
And that's where you get a third round of captains. And man, that third round of captains for those original guilds, some of those were problematic. And I actually want to tie into this. I know some of the playtesters personally who were playtesting at that time. They caught all the BS that they could with that. And they actually, those models didn't even go through the playtesters.
And you mentioned that same thing happened with the miners.
Yes.
So the miners had the same thing. And it's funny because the playtesters I know worked up a recommendation on how to fix miners, and slowly and progressively that was added in as errata. But it's one of those things that's like, I saw an email, and this is an exact quote. They pointed out an interaction with a model, and the email back from Steamforge basically said, "We understand that this is broken, but you're playing it in a way that's not as it's intended," and then it was printed it that way. So it's like, when you have that system, you already have a power creep problem with just the nature of this game structure. It's kind of easy to see where it goes off the rails. And I don't know, that's just me. But...
Yeah. Well, sorry, my dogs are barking. That's what the problem with live everything. Like I said, and I missed some of that trying to figure that out, but and I also had a derailment there for a second. Mm-hmm. But with I liked some of the. Okay, so I think they're going to cut it off at 10 players per team, and I think that the whole competitive nature of the game that they started lended to it is people get stuck on a team, right? They really love their team. We see that in society all the time, whether it's miniatures games or football or whatever. It doesn't matter. Sports, you get stuck to your team and you really. I mean, he calls me a Mason shield, but that's okay.
But it's interesting because at that time there weren't a lot of these ultra low model count miniature games out there.
No.
Guildball was one of the first ones. No. So I think a lot of people weren't conditioned to own multiple factions because they're coming from War Machine or Warhammer or something where you just didn't do that.
Yeah.
Whereas now you have Warcry. Now you've got we're gonna be playing Warcaster Neo Mechanica this Sunday, where it's so much cheaper now to play a faction that playing multiple factions is now viable.
Right. Yeah, most definitely. Because what I was
2 seconds. I'm fine.
Uh-huh. That's okay.
I still have headphones on. I just got
what I was going to say there is that I don't think it's only that people get attached to teams. I think when they realized the competitive nature was leading to less of a player base, right? Or a player base that diminishes over time because of the fact that it's so competitive, as most competitive games do, right? Like you have the wax and the wane, of players, because competitive can get overwhelming sometimes, especially if you're playing in tournaments and traveling or doing whatever. You lose people here, you pick up a few people there, you have some people come back and some people go. But I think when they realized that their player base was somewhat limited by the fact that it was so competitive, I think that also led to the need to put out more captains and put out more, to put out more more models.
They needed more material.
They needed more things to sell in order to the player base that they had in order to, keep up the revenue.
Well, let's not forget, like, Steamforge actually did do a story arc for Guildball. And there was a big calling for that story arc to continue. Well, spoiler if you don't know this, Philip dies, right? Ox is no longer ownership of the Butchers. And so what did they do from there? They had to create another captain that stepped forward in Ox's place. Though, like, I can see the natural progression of those captains being created. I can see a natural progression for the minor guilds to be created. Because those that are playing the story arcs and want to play toward that goal are going to buy those guilds. But again, they focused on a very small population.
Well, then, but that's the thing, is that the competitive players don't care about the story.
Exactly, Reno.
So the fact that, these characters died and all that, like, it doesn't matter to them.
Well, exactly.
I think it would have benefited them to instead of trying to do the field test and all those other things and trying to get new players in by making it simpler and so on and so forth, that it would have been better for them to, and maybe they had some products that were leaning towards this way, but to really put some time and effort into making an actual real narrative way to play the game. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you're still playing Guildball, you're still playing matches and so on and so forth, but there could have been a better.
You'd have to do rotation. You'd have to do rotation.
Yeah. But
seasonal rotation. And I know that to a lot of miniature gamers that's a dirty word, but X-Wing's been doing it since 2.0 launched, and it's going really well for them.
Well, that also benefits the players in a way. Like, the players that doesn't benefit are those players who never want to change their models, right? But I think it benefits people getting to use new models that they may not even know that they like. But it means that you're getting to play with all the stuff that you have. Because who do you know that only buys what's for their list? Some people maybe they will build a list and only buy for that. But in miniatures games, I mean, you always buy that little extra thing over here or that little extra thing over there for that faction. Even
you're going to see that on at least a small scale, yeah.
Yeah. So you get to play with all your models, and it also gives an opportunity for to take out that overpower factor, power creep stuff too.
What I think they should have done is do something like Magic does with standard rotation.
Yeah.
Season comes out. Here's your active roster for each team. In official sanctioned events for that season, that's the only legal players you can use. Give them updated rules for that season. Give them rules that reflect only that season, maybe. When you're playing Ox in season 5 or whatever, this is what it looks like. I know that doesn't work out, but you get the idea. And then have a legacy format where all these old players can come back and you can play with everybody.
Yeah.
I think that would have helped much more. You have a narrative hook for everything. And that doesn't entirely fix the problem, but it means that now instead of having your entire team of potential players to draw from, you're limiting your interactions to maybe 8. Because, I mean, realistically, there's only one active captain at any given time, really.
Yeah.
You're looking at one active mascot for the most part, and then a roster of 5 to 7 players. That's a much more manageable chunk of the game than anything else.
No. Ethan?
But this is all with hindsight.
Do you have anything to add to
that? I would like to add something to the playtest. That's, I don't know what you want to call it, but let's just call it a playtest. The goal of the playtest was to try to make the game more simple for beginning users.
The field test.
Here's the thing. When you start breaking down like what these mechanics did, it just seems like in hindsight, we should have been able to see the fact of they're trying to get any motivation started from the players to say yes or no. And they noted several times that they're receiving numerous responses. They're receiving all these responses back, and yet they still want to blame the community for being too toxic. And I happen to know that some of those suggestions were fine with the community. The influence pool, for instance, where you actually play from a pool instead of assigning, that was great because the older generation players didn't have a problem with it.
Yeah,
They were like, well,
there were some things that were crazy, but there are some we played that way, and we discussed it as we played as to what we liked and what we didn't like, and really in depth with that. Like, even though it was just a game or two, you really, as we did the new things, kind of laid it out. And there were only a couple, like maybe one thing, I was vehemently against removing wraps.
yep.
I think,
And I think that was something they did intentionally to try to get that feedback from the players.
but
They threw out 2 viable suggestions and 3 really, really terrible suggestions just to try to egg that feedback.
yeah, and that's the thing too. There's and you can see it now that they've announced the end, but it was always been that way. I mean, Nick, you hadn't played in quite some time, but you were still involved in keeping up with everything. Uh, keeping up with what was going on with the field testing, going, that kind of stuff, just keeping an eye on everything. And I think and not everybody does that, but I think that the Guildball community in that way is somewhat unique. I think when you really get tired of, let's use 40K as an example, because I really like to, beat that horse. Um, when you get tired and you just decide to leave 40K, it's kind of like scorched earth, for most people. It's just, I'm getting rid of everything I have. I don't, I don't want to look at another model, so on and so forth.
If I can add 2 things to what you're saying, I think that works better in Guildball because of low model count.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to have a team hanging around than it is to have a 40K army hanging around. And second off, don't use me for an example. Don't use me as an example for anything. I am the exception more often than the rule.
I know.
One of the reasons I keep up with games, even though I don't play them and in some cases actively despise them, is because it aggravates me when I talk to people and I hear them talk about a game that maybe I like or something, and they're complaining about something that hasn't existed in a decade.
Yeah.
I've literally had that discussion with people, and I'm not the biggest 40K. I play 40K. I've literally had that discussion with people of they're ranting about mechanics that died a decade ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, this is the reason why you shouldn't play 40K, but that hasn't been a thing since, since 5th edition.
And I have been guilty of that, I know, at least once, with 40K, as a matter of fact. But
this particular complaint I'm thinking of was how the wound allocation worked in 5th edition, which was busted stupid if you ever dealt with it.
I did.
And they're literally complaining about how, well, you had to do all this damage to the squad to kill it. And I'm like, you're correct, but at the same time, that mechanic stopped working that way in 2011.
Let's just be honest. I have one major complaint about 40K, and that the squats are no longer there. Anyway,
it might be coming back.
I want them so bad, but
they're in the rulebook. They're in the rulebook. There are references to them in the rulebook, and there's one in Necromunda.
Don't get me started on that. We're talking about Guildball today. If anybody doesn't know, I said it during my live paints that I love the smaller fantasy races. So I like dwarfs, I like gnomes, I like all of that. But anyway, and when they don't have dwarfs in 40K anymore, I was very sad. I think that's probably the reason why I haven't played it actively in a while. I have like 3,000 points of Space Marines just sitting in a display case that I played maybe 2 games with in the last 2 years.
12 inches away from me, I have 2,000 points of 40K set out, and a wall. It's yeah.
But getting back to we need to have one of these discussions with different people just about in general games, because I enjoy having multiple opinions. But back to, I don't know how much we can really beat the dead horse about that, but about most of the stuff about the end of Guildball. I just think I kind of want, as far as the end of it, or what they call the end of it, I just kind of want to do a little conclusion about that part, and then I would like to talk about with Ethan and specifically, and if you have anything to add as he talks about that, what he's seeing as far as the future of it. But what I was saying before that is that I think the Guildball community, um, even people who don't play anymore, have taken a lot of time to try to better the game over the last 6 years. I think it's been 6 years, right? Yeah. Um, my dog, of course, but
Yeah, they kickstarted in 14, released in 15.
yeah.
So yeah.
So over that whole course, it seemed like the community, from what I've seen, I haven't been involved in it the whole time, but looking back, like you said, listening to old podcasts or looking through old articles and stuff, it seems like they were always very active. And any time that Steamforge wanted to reach out to them, they were very, they responded like just in mass. This is what we see. This is what we want. This is what, this is what, we're trying to help out here. We want this game to have a long lifespan, right? We really want it to last as long as it possibly can. And maybe this is just, um, maybe it's run its course as far as what a company can carry it. And, because sometimes that happens. I mean, Steamforge has their hands in a number of pies now with their board games and
Kickstarter based.
Can I butt in with a crackpot conspiracy theory?
Yeah.
So there's a conspiracy theory floating around, and it's kind of backed up by a little bit, and it makes a lot of sense. Is Steamforge recently picked up some investors.
Yeah.
You will notice that the president is no longer the president; he's the CEO, which implies that there are investors and a board and all that.
Yeah.
And they were not happy with Guildball because it turns out things like Dark Souls and Horizon Zero Dawn make a whole lot more money for a whole lot less of an investment.
What is their game? They have another miniatures game, don't they?
God Tier.
God Tier.
God Tier.
Yeah. So, which is what, like a MOBA on a board, on a table?
It's tabletop
Text-based.
MOBA, and a lot of people I know who were getting into it are jumping off the boat now because of Guildball's demise.
Well, like I said, when you make that transition to, like you said, the corporate investors and stuff like that, some things always get hit. But I think that in the end, and I don't know, I wasn't in the boardroom, right? So I don't know if they tried to fight for it or whatever, but, maybe it was just too much trouble for them to fix what the investors thought needed to be fixed in order to get it, get it back on track or make it,
I think it was a profitability thing. Ultimately, they're a business. Can Guildball be fixed with the minimum amount of effort to still make it sell enough to justify its existence?
Right. Exactly.
And how many Kickstarter campaigns is it going to take to do that?
That's a good question.
You can't really. You can throw the Kickstarter word around a lot, but there are a lot of companies doing that right now.
Oh, I know, but
Privateer Press did it with Neo Mechanica. Warcaster.
Corvus Belly does it.
Corvus Belly does it.
Cool Mini or Not does it.
Yeah, so look, I can't fault the company for getting concrete funding for something instead of shilling out a lot of money to turn around and have something just not work out. And
as long as they follow through with it,
exactly.
I don't fault them.
Exactly. As long as they, you see these larger companies.
You mentioned Privateer Press.
Yeah.
Their Warcaster Kickstarter was in like April.
Yeah.
I have my fully assembled Warcaster army about 18 inches away from me.
Well,
I already have the models. They're done, assembled, and getting ready to go off and get painted in 4 months?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
that's the way you do a Kickstarter if you want a miniature game. They were basically done. They just needed just essentially as pre-orders at that point.
I know someone who waited for Dark Souls for nearly a year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and like I said, larger companies, I don't see a problem with it. Smaller companies, even I don't see a problem with it as long as they have the ability to actually, fulfill the orders and get through the process without, but that could be like a whole nother talk.
Without having a Robotech RPG Tactics happen.
So there are a bunch of games that did that either through Kickstarter or not even through Kickstarter, just games that.
If anybody's watching, I think I just gave them PTSD.
Yeah. There's a lot going on, and we should have a discussion like this about the general state of the miniatures gaming industry at some point. and we have a couple of people we could bring in on that. And I think that would be a riot.
Hey, board games in general are booming.
Yeah.
Like,
So
board games are miniature games are in a weird spot, mostly because 40K dominates that industry.
well, it's like you look at Privateer Press. I mentioned them before, but I mean they put out Riot Quest.
They have expanded their portfolio a fair bit, and based off what I'm hearing, is it's working out really well for them.
Riot Quest seems like a hoot. I haven't played it, but it looks awesome.
We can fix that. We have Riot Quest here.
Nice.
We have Riot Quest. Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, but back to Guildball. What I was saying is, as far as the official end of Guildball, SRG. Wow, wrong company. Sorry. Steamforged, it's SFG. Steamforged Games said that as of September the 1st, they will start basically just clearing everything out that they still have in stock for
that's actually starting now. September 1st is the first day at which it will no longer be available.
Okay.
You have until the end of August if you want to play Guildball and buy models. And let me piggyback on that statement real fast. If you want to continue a Guildball community, grab as many teams, basic 6 model teams. They don't have to be synergistic or whatever. Grab as many as you can.
Yep.
Because when that new player comes to you in 3 years and says, "Hey, this looks cool. Where can I buy everything?" You need to have something for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the company doesn't have, and there isn't a company anymore there isn't a company that's going to sell that anymore.
I would like to also add to, well, you know what? I'll tell you that in a minute. But
side note: if anybody wants a farmer's box, I have it sitting around.
We
have.
I will. Oh, go ahead, David.
But what I was saying is that at this point in time, starting now, monitor every single retailer you know of that carries Guildball. Miniature Market, definitely, because they love their clearance sales.
Oh my God. Miniature Market clearance sales.
I looked on it today. There's like 814 items on special clearance or on, or last chance or whatever.
Yep.
But I look at it all the time. But keep your eye on everything. Buy as much as you can afford, even if you're not going to use it right now, because I foresee very deep discounts on all of it, as deep as they can go. They just want to get it out. They don't want it just sitting there. Also, don't forget to look at the accessory makers for that, to use on minis, those places that make Guildball specific accessories. That's another place to look, but do that. But so that is something to do in the apocalypse which kills Guildball officially.
Mm-hmm.
I want to shift, because we're going on about 50 minutes, but I want to shift to what we foresee happening as we go along. Ethan has some specific information about that, but I want to say before he gets into it that I am a big fan of Blood Bowl, and Blood Bowl was carried by their community for a long time before GW decided to come back and revamp the game in 2016, I believe it was. I don't remember the exact amount of time, but I know it was literally years that they carried it with their own living rule book, and
it was in decades.
Yeah, decades.
It was decades.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So they carried it along the way, and then GW decided, hey, people still love this game, so maybe we'll add some more stuff and we can make some more money. So that was one thing at the end of basically each person's statement in that article was, we don't know what's going to happen, but as of right now, we're not going to do it. So will that love carry over with them? Will they come back to it later on and say we're in a more profitable position where we can expend some more money to bring it back? But until then, the Guildball community as a whole have really kicked into gear trying to do exactly what the Blood Bowl players did when they took away Blood Bowl, which is to keep the game alive, whether it's through using what's currently available or moving forward. I want to make a point too, because Josh who also has done some videos with us, will kill me if I don't. the Dragon Ball Z card game that's still
Yep. And it
still
went
being
for decades.
yeah, it's still being today, having like paid tournaments and all kinds of stuff still going in that community. So, it is possible to carry a game. So the naysayers out there that say, well, it's done, it's whatever. It's only as done as the people who supported it to begin with say it's done. So I'll stop ranting, but Ethan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've gone through in the last, what,
Yeah,
36 hours or whatever
you
it
start with
is.
the optimistic version. I'll then do the pessimistic version.
That's
Yeah.
fine. I'm okay with the debate format. So if you're involved in the Facebook group for Guildball supporters, you've probably seen a lot of chatter about the Discord server that's being started by the community to try and inform all the missing pieces that we need. Right now, it's headed by a couple of great guys, one of which I know personally is Niles. Most of you may know him as Hat, the Inspiring Hatter. And kudos to those guys. I honestly think it takes a community to keep it alive, and I honestly think we have the community in place to do it. It's just going to be able to. We have to keep this drive going. Some of the things that they're already initiating are great. They're currently working through legal processes for if the IP goes for sale, how can we, as a community, try to obtain it? There's a lot of different pie charts and diagrams and spider like connections of conspiracy theories. Like how can we as a community give back to something that has given us joy throughout the years, which is very commendable and can be done. That being said, it takes people to do that. And you start seeing the people that are leaving Steamforge. Bryce is forming a podcast that's not Guildball related. All the Guildball developers that aren't at Steamforge anymore. We're trying to, I feel like we should try to utilize them as much as possible because they have information. With that community presence, we can also keep going and possibly refund some things that Guildball put a stop to, like the London program. And from there, we can get a better grasp of data by region and meta and all this other things. And as a community, can make these choices. And if we do what Pokemon does, where you have a league leader, a regional leader, and then a person over those, you're able to funnel this information very quickly and very efficiently. But you need the people in place.
Yeah.
And going through all the chatter right now, it's a lot of negative, a lot of people saying nay, and then there's these people that are willing to step up and take that choice.
Right.
And I commend every one of you, and I hope to join you soon.
Yeah.
So, Nick, go ahead and rebuttal.
Before
It's not
Nick
a rebuttal.
rebuts, before Nick goes
It's not a rebuttal. I promise it's not a
let
rebuttal.
Let me say one thing. I think people don't realize how much manpower or person power it takes to do these types of things.
Yeah.
I have seen already a number of people who are really passionate about this project. Hat is, he's always a passionate person every time I speak to him when it comes to Guildball. And if anybody's going to be able to help guide it in the right direction, I think that he can. But I want to say to those people who are thinking about it, if anybody's watching this who's thinking about it, make sure that you know what you're going to have to put forth and that you're willing to do it before you step in. Because the last thing that these people need who really want to make this happen is for people to come in and move to a role that's very important, only to leave and they have to replace that person and replace that knowledge and replace that time.
Yep.
So that's all I wanted to say. It's just I'm fully behind you. I can't put myself in a role where I have to do that. I have too much going on already, but I would. But I commend everyone who's trying to do that. So
I would like to build on one more thing. If you are running a local group and you have a decent number of people within that group, create a poll find what guilds you're missing, and if you can, try to pick up at least one copy of that guild, just as a shareable copy. We're doing that with our local guild right now. We were able to get a practice copy for every guild except for the order, and I believe we're also short engineers.
Yeah, I'll have to look. Order is the minor for union, right? Basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. But I mean, that's just the kind of steps we're taking, and we want that opportunity to be there for if someone comes into the shop and they heard that we're doing this. We want them to have the opportunity to choose something off the wall. Now, granted, it's not going to be my rats. It's not going to be that, but I have a spare copy. It doesn't have to be something that you like meticulously painted that they borrow. They can borrow, like, if you have some figures that are missing arms, legs.
Yeah.
Just something to get them playing with a guild that they think they're interested in.
Right.
Go.
Are we good?
Speaking of painting,
Go ahead, sir.
For anybody who's wondering, that's Tristan back there. He's actually painting another game that's in question about if it will ever come back again or do anything in Wrath of Kings, which I very seriously doubt. But we enjoy it, so he's painting a model.
Good old cool mini or not.
Yeah.
Are we good to go for the pessimistic
go
approach?
for it.
Okay, so
Yes,
first off, I want to say that I don't disagree with what you guys are doing. I wish you all the best of luck. I'm going to tell you from personal experience, having been involved in 3 attempts to keep a game alive, 2 of which failed. Things you got to watch out for. And all of these had people who were interested. Dozens of people who were saying, I want to help keep this game alive. The same things I'm seeing in Guildball. I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary yet. The things you need to keep to succeed. First off, you have to get a source of replacement miniatures. Okay? Steamforge's stock is not infinite, and as time goes on, the available stock of models will disappear. Now, if this means people do 3D modeling and make the prints available, that's fine. The one game that keeps going, that I know still keeps going, does that. Somebody went through and they're modeling a lot of these models, and then the community has a group of people who are assigning stats to them. And then you just print them off. Okay? That has to be there, because the biggest issue you're going to run into is new player comes to you in 5 years. What do you have for them? Ethan, you mentioned having some stuff for them to demo, and I agree with that. I would have as close to an unpainted set of every guild lying around, at least a basic 6-person team that you're willing to sell them or give to them.
Yep.
Their models is if the models are theirs, they mean much more than if they're on loan. Okay, so you really need to push that. Another thing I think you need to do is there needs to be a independent Facebook group of people who acknowledge that they're not getting company support. And the Guildball supporters group kind of is that, and it might morph into that. But there needs to be some centralized hub for all this stuff. And like I said, the biggest challenge is getting new people excited and on board with it. I can tell you from personal experience working on the heavy gear game, even just as a side volunteer, it's a lot of work. It's more work than I had any idea. And there's so many things you have to really break down and consider every time you want to put something in. You know, they're talking about coming out with stats for the minor guilds. I wish them the best of luck. I don't know if they quite appreciate how much work that is.
Yeah.
I hope they do. Particularly since I don't think Steamforge is going to give you guys anything to go off of.
Nope.
No.
The best thing Steamforge could do, if they were interested in fostering a long-term community, is make the models available for resin print and give at least a basic playtest draft of all the remaining minor guilds.
Yeah.
That would set the community up for a good long-term healthy position. I don't think any of that's going to happen. I don't think the IP is going to go up for sale, especially now that they have investors.
Yep.
The investors aren't going to let that go, because there might be an argument in 10 years for reviving Guildball.
Yep.
I don't think you're going to see that. It's the same reason why GW didn't sell Blood Bowl. They didn't sell the IP because they might do it eventually. It costs them nothing to maintain it.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't think they're going to get rid of it. So the big thing is getting new people in, having something there for them. The games that I'm thinking about that failed. My very first miniature game I played was a game called Mech Warrior Age of Destruction. It was set in the Battletech universe, used the click system. It died. There is still a group of maybe 100 people who still play the game actively. I'm on their Facebook group. They've developed their own rules and all that, but the problem is as it decreased in population, the group that was in control of everything consolidated and is essentially running the boat. And if you don't like what they're doing, you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
The other game I'm thinking of is Warhammer Fantasy Battles. The Ninth Age was a project, and I believe even got bought out by a company and was made as a product. But you don't hear anything about it anymore because their issue is new player retention. Buying the biggest failing of Warhammer Fantasy was it was too expensive,
I
and they
think
never fixed that.
Kings of War has kind of stepped into that.
Kings of War has taken its spot because it had a ready rule set for all your models, but there still was a Ninth Age, and that was part of it. Is there was a split in the community. Do you go to Kings of War, or do you go to the Ninth Age?
Yeah.
The one that survived a little bit in terms of still having a reasonably active player base, I can think of is a game called Halo Fleet Battles by Spartan Games. Spartan closed about 3 years ago, very suddenly, and they had a licensed Halo space combat game. And what people did is they got the core of it. They got some design notes from the company, as far as I can tell. And people are out there making 3D renders of models. Their community is driven, assigning stats to them. And while they don't have organized tournaments, there's still a core of people playing this game. And they're still getting new people into it. Our local gaming store here in Fort Smith, Hobbytown, USA, had a box sitting on their shelf for like 3 years. It sold last week.
Yeah.
Somebody bought it wanting to start playing that game. That's what you have to get. And my concerns with Guildball, number one is exposure. Guildball's out there. How many people have heard of Guildball and would be interested in it? Then you have to get them a demo and get product in their hands for them to do with their thing. And then once you have that set up, then you have a base of people that are going to keep playing the game. The problem is if you don't do that, you have an ever shrinking community. It basically becomes almost a fan project at that point, where it's one person, it's one group of people's mad dream. And that's the concern with Guildball is like Warhammer Fantasy, when it died, a lot of people were violently upset at GW and went to go do their own thing. And there was more of a push at that time than what you're seeing in Guildball to keep fantasy alive. It's dead. It didn't save it. Am I saying Guildball's going to fail? Not necessarily. But those are the things that I've seen haunt multiple attempts to keep dead games alive. In the case of Blood Bowl, there were generic sci-fi generic fantasy football models were a thing. They also didn't try to add any new content. They just did community patches to the rules.
Yeah.
They didn't add any new teams. They didn't. Dave mentioned a living rulebook. It was more of a clarifications and FAQ. Particularly if the Guildball project is looking to add stuff, that's a very concerning, or that's something you got to watch out for, I think. I want to see it succeed. I think Guildball's a great game. Personally, I think Guildball, you just kind of have to start from scratch if you really want to make a successful attempt at Guildball as a company, not necessarily as a community. So, like, I followed their field test, and most of my commentary on the field test, I didn't provide it because I'm not an active player, was, you kind of have to throw all of this out.
Yeah.
Not because it's bad, but because there's so much here that imagine if you're a new player. Imagine if you're a new player. Particularly if you're looking at Guildball, seeing this very competitive community, are you okay with losing your first 100 games and still maybe not being sure what's going wrong? And, I've seen Guildball games lost on a quarter of an inch or less. And that can be frustrating. I've seen Guildball has a lot of things that could be argued to be negative play experiences, where they're not necessarily unbalanced, they're just unfun. Particularly some of the, not the heroic plays, the legendary plays. where you get some single crazy combo off that, if it's set up right, is almost completely non-interactive. You essentially just, oh, it happened. Here's your 4 points or whatever. Life goes on. So that's, again, I'm being pessimistic, but I've seen this work in some cases to an extent. I've seen it fail. I can't think of any truly dead games that have a large following anymore.
Yeah.
In the miniature realm.
A lot of card games. There are a few card games, but
there's a fair few card games that still have, they're long out of production, but people still play it. And maybe this is just kind of a closing thought for this. I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add, or
well, why don't you go ahead, hold on to that for just a second, and we'll all just at this point, I think we all can just, if everybody agrees, we can just go ahead and we can start with you, Nick, because you're in that frame of mind. To start kind of giving our conclusion to everything.
So I guess my conclusion is not so much a conclusion, just a closing thought. If you're a Guildball player and Guildball died, you have effectively two choices. Do you continue with the fan project, hoping that it succeeds? It's not a guarantee, not by a long shot. Or maybe you start looking at other places. Okay, you liked Guildball. What did you like about Guildball? Did you like the idea that it was a sports game? Did you like its alternating activation mechanic? Did you like its interactions of abilities? What did you like about the game? And then start looking at what else is out there. One thing I find miniature gamers tend to do is people tend to get very tunnel visioned on one or two games that they very much like, and they miss a whole wide world of what's out there. So my closing thought is, hey, think about it. Do you want to get involved in this community project? No one's going to take Guildball away from you. But ask yourself the question, maybe you look for something else to start really pouring time into. Not in place of Guildball so much as the next step. If you're looking for a sports game, your options are Blood Bowl or Dreadball. And that's about it, unfortunately, in miniature game land. But other mechanics, I can't think of any other sports games.
Some might call Gaslands a motorsports game, but other than that.
Yeah, I'm thinking like there's a ball and there's things going on. I understand. But what are you looking for? What about the game caught your attention, and really critically think about it, and then use that to guide your next decision. I would advise that start looking at other games. Not necessarily that if you think the community project's going to fail, but a dead game very rarely grows. I don't think Guildball's ever going to get any bigger. I think the question is, how much does it maintain? So that's just me.
Ethan?
So nothing in life is easy. Nothing in life is guaranteed. If you deeply care about this and you want to get involved in the community, do it. If you're on the fence about it, start looking out. For me personally, I would like a community aspect to exist. There's multiple instances where charity events are driven off these. And I would love to see those continue. So I guess my closing argument is, are you prepared to roll the dice?
Fair enough.
And if you're not, then start looking at aspects. If you are ready to roll the dice, hope you don't roll ones, but jump in and do what you can. Be that person that needs to be there. David?
All right. So, as in most cases, I'm kind of in the middle about most things, but I'm kind of the combining factor, a combining thought. When it comes to Guildball, I don't think there's, it's like, so I was talking to Ethan the other day, and I told him, I said, here's the deal. I said the same thing that Ethan said. I don't believe the IP will ever be for sale. That's number one. There's too much there that they can use. But I didn't think that the Legend of the Five Rings IP would ever be sold by IEG either. But that happens. Um, with all the comments about we don't know what the future of Guildball actually is from almost everybody who put a little piece into that article. I think if it does, it'll be a long time. But like I told Ethan the other day, the only thing that is legally untouchable with Guildball is the IP. Okay, you can't patent game mechanics. You can't patent any of that stuff, right? Because it's an idea more than it is a machine or a device or whatever the case may be. You can copyright a rule book and no one can, you can, well, even then you are responsible for actually defending that copyright, not anybody else. But game mechanics have been used to create, for multiple games, to create games for years. There are only so many original ideas when it comes to that, right? So everybody borrows from people. You find good things you like about one thing and you add it together. So I offer a third option to this. I agree with the other two that were handed out. One is you really passionately go after trying to keep the game alive or even grow it. But I agree with the fact that without product, that's, unless you have someone who can make like Grebo Games does for Blood Bowl. They make a number of miniatures that can be used in place of GW miniatures to play the game of Blood Bowl, right? So if another company like Grebo Games or a new one wanted to make similar models in the same vein, right, that were different enough from what's there, you could technically have models. Or like he said, if files come out, you can have that. The option of looking at other games, I'm the world's worst at it. You can ask my wife. I'm always seeing a game and going, that looks cool. I must at least get a starter and play that. Or I just live vicariously through Nick, who has all of it anyway. But I offer a third option. That third option is, if you love what Guildball was, and there were just aspects of it that it wasn't all about the IP, right? It wasn't all about that story arc. The other option that you have is to create a game in a similar vein, because I kind of agree with Nick that in order to, it's going to be a very hard road fixing the mistakes that are there. Starting somewhat fresh is going to, or starting fresh is your best option, but you can take a few things away and start, semi-fresh. But if you're going to do that already, maybe think about keeping some, using some of those mechanics that you like so much, combining them with other mechanics you thought maybe should have been present, and putting together your own version of what, of that game. I mean, I jokingly called it murder soccer the other day when I was talking about it. But, that is an option. And it takes just about, if not, maybe a little bit more, but it takes a similar amount of effort. Okay? Because that's going to be an effort hole for quite some time, trying to correct mistakes and do all that. But I don't say don't do it, because I think it's a great idea. But that is a third option that will be on par with that undertaking, but will also give you more freedom to make things more like what you want. So I don't think any of those options are bad, except for if you're just not up for dealing with other people making up things or patching things or fixing things that are wrong with the game and trying to keep up with it, fine. But if you are willing to take a little bit extra effort and want to continue playing Guildball, you don't have to be involved in the rebuilding of it. You can help play test. You can just continue to play with the suggestions that are made. It's just as important to keep the game in the eye of people, the public eye, for lack of a better term, as it is to recreate it or modify it. So if all the people who are playing now, a small fraction of them go and start modifying and such, and the rest of the larger portion of the community don't continue to play the game and continue to give feedback to those people who are trying to make it a better game or keep it alive, that project ends immediately. So you have to, if you're in for keeping it around, you have to play games. You have to play games in public or on the internet. So we won't stop playing games and putting them out on Tabletop Sports Network because we enjoy the game and it's a fun project for us. So actually I have a couple I still have to do. So like I said, 3 options, and you can do as many of them as you want, to be honest with you. But
if I can, I think you're dancing around an issue, and I think it's something you're getting at. Ultimately, what does your local community want to do? If your local community wants to help contribute to keeping Guildball alive through a new fan season and new stuff, we'll go work with that. If your community just wants to play what's there and keep playing Guildball as is, then I'd recommend doing that. Mm-hmm. If your community just dissolves, then maybe it's time to look at something else and move on. What is your community doing?
Or just play with those people who still want to stay. You don't have to have a massive thing.
Exactly. What's happening in other states and other countries doesn't have to affect how you play the game. It's the nice thing about not having a company that's supporting the game anymore is nobody can tell you how to play it. And I just do want to clarify my point. I'm not saying jump ship off of Guildball. I'm just saying maybe take the chance to start looking at other things, not in place of, but as a next step. Keep playing Guildball. But now that Guildball is fallen off to an extent, maybe now's the chance to go try something else.
Okay. Well, I think that we can go around and do more and more of the same talk. And I would probably do that if we weren't recording it live for the people on the internet because I just like to talk, as most people know. But I think that we've all kind of given our 2 cents about the whole situation. So unless there's anything else that anybody wants to add real quickly, I think that we're pretty much done with this. But is there anything else anybody needs to throw in?
Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Exactly. I thank everybody for watching. Anybody who watches it and the recording later, make sure you check out our website at whatgamenow.com. Make sure you go to our Facebook at facebook.com/whatgamenow. All those links are actually at the top of our YouTube page. So if you're watching this now, on our channel page at the top in the header, you have those links. And then Instagram.com/whatgamenow. And they're also at our website. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share this with other people if you enjoy what you're watching. And follow the links at the end of this, at the end of our other videos. Get around and see everything that we're doing. If you have any suggestions, please let us know through Messenger on Facebook. Thank you guys for taking the time to sit down and talk about the games that we've either have enjoyed over the last 5-6 years. And I look forward to doing more of these conversations like this as we go along. So thank you guys. Thank everyone, and you'll have a great night.